My husband tried to give away our baby to his sister, because I was unfit to be a mother. I gave him two choices. I closed the nursery door gently, and stood for a moment, listening to the soft, rhythmic breathing of my daughter, Lily, in her bassinet. At 34 years old, I had finally achieved the impossible. 3 years of trying, 2 devastating miscarriages, and endless rounds of fertility treatments had culminated in this perfect, healthy, 8-pound angel. Those first few days home were pure magic. Nate, my husband, had been everything I dreamed of. He woke up for the 3 feedings with me. We would sit together in the quiet darkness while I nursed, and he would whisper stories to Lily about how much we had fought and waited for her. Our love for her, and for each other, felt boundless. His family had thrown us a huge welcome home party. Everyone was thrilled, but no one was as intensely focused on Lily as his sister, Rachel. Rachel, who was 38, had also been trying for children for longer than we had, enduring her own losses. At the party, she held Lily for hours. She wouldn't put her down, not even when Lily fussed or cried. I remember thinking it was sweet, how much she loved being an aunt, a sentiment tinged with empathy for her own struggles. Then, the visits started. At first, Rachel was genuinely helpful. She'd bring casseroles, and take the burden of laundry off my plate, and for a new mom exhausted, but running on adrenaline, it was a lifeline. But about 2 weeks after we came home, the feeling of helpfulness curdled into something else, something uncomfortable and intrusive. She began showing up at 6 a.m., without calling, claiming she just wanted to let me sleep in. I would wake up and find her sitting in the nursery rocker, just staring at Lily in her crib. Her attention wasn't casual, it was intense, consuming. She started using possessive language, referring to Lily as my baby, instead of my niece. When I tried to correct her gently, she would dismiss it with a patronizing laugh, saying, "You are being sensitive, Adeline. It's all the hormones." The feeling of stepping into my own home and finding the physical space altered was deeply unsettling. One morning, I walked into the nursery and found Rachel had completely rearranged the furniture. The bassinet was moved. The changing table was on the opposite wall, and the mobile was hung over a new spot. She claimed the previous layout was wrong for proper development, and that she knew better because she had read extensive articles about baby neurodevelopment. Nate, true to form, dismissed my frustration with a wave of his hand. "She's just excited, Adeline. She means well. She's trying to help." But this wasn't helping. This was taking control. The ultimate line was crossed when she began showing up precisely during Lily's feeding times. She would sit right next to me, watching me nurse, her eyes unblinking, saying she was learning for when she had her own baby. It felt like an invasion of the most intimate time I had with my daughter. Then came the calculated strike against my competence. She showed up with several jugs of expensive organic formula, insisting I should switch immediately. She told Nate and me, with a clinical severity that felt entirely false, that breastfeeding was making me too tired to be a good mother. I told her no, point blank, but that night, she went straight to Nate. She told him I was being stubborn and putting my pride over Lily's actual needs. The next morning, Nate actually looked me in the eye and asked me to seriously consider using the formula Rachel bought. He was asking me to doubt my body, my bond, my instincts, all based on his sister's pathological need to insert herself into my role. The betrayal was quiet, domestic, and utterly devastating. I knew then that the threat was no longer just Rachel. The threat was Rachel and Nate. The quiet devastation of Nate, suggesting I abandon breastfeeding to appease his sister, was a scar that settled deep in my chest. It felt like the erosion of the foundation we had built as parents. The threat shifted from just Rachel's manipulation to the frightening weakness of my partner. I pushed back, of course. I told Nate, with a coldness I didn't know I possessed, that Rachel's opinion on Lily's nutritional needs was irrelevant, and that I would not be substituting $100 jugs of formula for my own milk, just because his sister was jealous. He didn't argue further, but his silence was just as loud as an argument, filled with that same old, familiar conflict avoidance that always prioritized his family's comfort over my reality. The problem with Rachel wasn't just the invasion. It was the psychological warfare. She was relentless, targeting my deepest insecurities as a new mother. She knew about my history, about the miscarriages, about how terrified I was of doing something wrong after fighting so hard to bring Lily into the world. She used that knowledge as a weapon. A few days later, the real escalation began. I was out for a brief, much-needed appointment with Lily's pediatrician. It was the first time I had been out alone with Lily, feeling that small, fleeting moment of new, mom normalcy. But that fragile sense of peace shattered the moment I walked back through my front door. I found Nate and Rachel in the living room. The large, dark wood coffee table was covered in papers. Not nursery plans or baby gifts, but printed articles. Rachel was pointing to a list of symptoms highlighted in bright yellow marker. I could see the header of one article: postpartum depression and psychosis. Know the warning signs. My breath hitched. I stood there, clutching the diaper bag strap, watching them. Rachel was leaning over the table, her face grave, and Nate was nodding, his expression mirroring her serious concern. I just think Adeline is proving my point, Rachel was saying, her voice lowered conspiratorially. She seemed so overwhelmed. The way she snapped at me when I suggested the formula. That defensiveness is a huge sign of emotional distress, Nate. Look, sudden mood swings, irrational irritability. I slammed the diaper bag onto the hall table. The loud thud made both of them jump. Nate looked up, startled, his face instantly draining of color. But Rachel only tilted her head, her expression shifting instantly to one of wounded concern. Adeline. Honey, we were just talking about how tired you look, she said, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. Maybe you need more help than you are admitting. I was just showing Nate some articles about how many new moms struggle. I walked over to the table and snatched the top article. It listed things like inability to bond and thoughts of harming the child. Are you serious? I whispered, my voice thick with cold shock. You are making a list of symptoms I don't have, Rachel, and trying to diagnose me with a serious mental illness because I told you to stop showing up unannounced. Nate jumped up then, trying to intervene. Adeline, calm down. She's just worried about you. We're worried. You do seem overwhelmed. The words, "we're worried," were the ultimate blow. He wasn't defending me. He wasn't seeing his sister's pathological manipulation. He was joining her. He was validating her lie. He had chosen to view me through her lens of unfit and struggling, instead of through the reality of a normal, exhausted but functioning mother. That night, after Rachel finally left, full of false sympathy and promises to pray for my recovery, Nate sat me down. The air in our home was heavy, thick with unspoken accusations and dread. Rachel made an offer. He began, unable to meet my eyes. She said, "You are clearly having a tough time." She offered to take Lily for a few weeks. To her house, an hour away. Just to give you a break, so you can rest and recover properly. The sentence hung in the air, a poisonous plume of absolute betrayal. He said the words, "Take Lily." Not, "Babysit." Not, "Help out." He was proposing I surrender my 3-week-old baby to his clearly obsessive sister, based on a false diagnosis of my mental health. I felt a dizzying wave of nausea and rage. I asked him if he had lost his mind. I asked him if he had forgotten the 3 years of heartache and the miscarriages we endured together. I asked him how he could look at the beautiful daughter we fought for and suggest giving her away. His response, flat and devoid of empathy, was the final confirmation of his position. He said, "You are proving Rachel's point by getting this defensive and angry." It was the final line. The line where a partner stopped being a partner and became an active participant in the opposition. I told him if he ever suggested giving away our baby again, he would be talking to a divorce lawyer. I left him standing there and went to the guest room, locking the door behind me. I didn't sleep that night. Listening to the muffled sounds of him settling on the couch, the man who had promised to protect us now actively participating in the effort to dismantle my family. The next day, Rachel called. She cried, saying I was being selfish and keeping her from her niece. She said family helps each other. And then, her voice hardening, she delivered the final blow that turned my blood to ice. She said, "Maybe I'd be a better mother to Lily, since I actually appreciated the gift of a child." I hung up. I knew then this wasn't about rest, or help, or PPD. This was about a woman trying to replace me, and a husband too weak to stop her. Finding Nate and Rachel comparing notes on my symptoms showed me the depths of the delusion. But the full betrayal hit that night, when Nate told me Rachel offered to take Lily away. Rachel's voice, declaring she would be a better mother, had stripped away the last veneer of polite family drama, replacing it with cold, hard danger. I couldn't sleep in the guest room. I sat up most of the night, listening to the silence, punctuated only by the refrigerator humming and Lily's soft coos from the next room. That call with Rachel confirmed everything. This was an attempt to replace me, not help me. My immediate response to Nate had been rage and a divorce threat, but I knew I needed to move with cold precision, not just emotion. Nate's family would never believe me if I simply claimed Rachel was being obsessive. They were hardwired to protect Rachel because of her struggles, and I needed to expose their pattern of enabling. The phone calls started the next day. Nate's mother, Adeline, called first. Her voice was cautious and strained. "Adeline, Rachel called me. And she's very upset," Elodie said. "She told us you are struggling and refusing all help. She said she's worried about Lily and that you are keeping her from her niece." I gripped the phone tightly, the plastic creaking under my fingers. Elodie, I am not struggling. And Rachel is lying. I have never refused help. I only refused to give her my child. But Elodie's response was frustratingly dismissive. Annie, she just loves that baby so much. You know how hard her losses have been. Maybe just let her come over and hold Lily. You know, let her feel useful. She wanted me to prioritize Rachel's feelings over my protective instincts. I refused. Then Nate's father, Hugo, called, echoing the same concerns. Then another sister-in-law. Rachel had done exactly what I suspected. She had poisoned the entire family well, painting me as the defensive, irrational, and, most crucially, unfit mother who was hoarding their precious granddaughter. Every conversation was a thinly veiled interrogation, designed to make me feel guilty and second-guess myself. They weren't checking on Lily's well-being, they were checking on Rachel's narrative. I felt a surge of cold fury, which was far more useful than fear. My greatest weakness had been my isolation and their gaslighting. I realized I needed hard evidence. Something that couldn't be dismissed as a new mother's hormones. I went straight to the hardware store that afternoon. I bought a small, discreet digital voice recorder. Placing it inside a basket of blankets in the living room, where Rachel and Nate always had their confidential meetings. I also realized I had an even better tool, the baby monitor app on my phone. I hadn't used the audio-video recording feature much, but it was perfect. It recorded everything that happened in the nursery, which Rachel now treated as her personal space. The next few days were agonizing. I kept the recorder on whenever Rachel was in the house. I kept my face carefully neutral when she spoke, refusing to give her a new reason to label me defensive. My stomach turned every time I caught Nate and Rachel whispering in the kitchen. Knowing their conversation was being captured, but also knowing I needed the proof. The recordings quickly mounted. I got her on audio saying that the house was too chaotic for a newborn, and that Lily would be better off with a mother who deserved her. I got Nate agreeing that I seemed too attached to Lily and that some space would be good for everyone. The betrayal, recorded and digitized, was now undeniable. One of my closest friends, Natalia Perez, a woman who rarely minced words, called me that week. I told her the entire, unbelievable story, ending with Rachel's claim of wanting to be a better mother. Adeline, Natalia said, her voice dropping to a serious tone. You need to hire a lawyer. Right now. This isn't just family drama. This is a deliberate attempt to take your child. You need proof, and you need a legal strategy. Natalia was right. My emotional response had given way to cold strategy. I felt myself hardening, the protective instinct overriding the desire to keep the peace. I didn't care about their feelings anymore. I only cared about Lily's safety. My determination crystallized the following week, when I found out Rachel had been telling her friends she was going to adopt a baby soon. One of them, a woman I knew casually from a prenatal class, actually congratulated me at the grocery store for being such a selfless sister-in-law, volunteering to help Rachel in her adoption journey. The shock was visceral. Rachel hadn't been planning to babysit Lily, she was planning to execute a slow, soft adoption through manipulation and family pressure. This was never a short-term break for me. It was a permanent replacement for her. My heart pounded with cold clarity. I knew my next move had to be preemptive, I had the evidence, and I was going to force Rachel's hand. I invited her over for coffee the next morning to clear the air and apologize for overreacting. I needed to bring her into my space one last time before the hammer fell. I needed her to believe I was broken. The recordings gave me power, but I needed to see how far Rachel would push before I made my move. I knew the congratulation at the grocery store for being a selfless sister-in-law was a clear sign that Rachel was not just dreaming of a baby. She was actively moving to secure Lily, believing her adoption plan was imminent. My planned apology was not about peace, it was bait. When Rachel arrived the next morning, she brought a guest, a woman in a severe pantsuit carrying a clipboard, introduced simply as Marilyn, a friend from my women's group. Marilyn's presence immediately set off every alarm bell in my body. Rachel, feigning a soft, concerned smile, explained that Marilyn was a social worker and that she had insisted on coming along just to make sure Adeline was truly safe and getting the help she needed. This was it. Rachel wasn't waiting for a slow burn takeover, she was attempting a sudden, official intervention based on lies. She was using a professional contact to validate her false narrative of neglect and unfitness. The air in the living room felt thick and suffocating, smelling of old coffee and fresh desperation. I managed to keep my expression confused and slightly wounded, which was easy enough since I felt genuinely sick with adrenaline. A wellness check, Rachel. Why would you do that? Rachel immediately launched into her rehearsed performance, the picture of a worried sister. I told Marilyn about how defensive you've been, Adeline, and how you seemed so isolated and overwhelmed. She knows all about postpartum psychosis, and honestly, the way you've been refusing help and keeping Lily away from the family. Marilyn, the social worker friend, didn't look malicious, just professional and a little wary. She took one quick, sweeping look around our living room, which was admittedly spotless. I'd spent an hour cleaning just to look normal before Rachel arrived. Lily was in her bassinet, sleeping soundly after a full feed, her little face pink and peaceful. Rachel, Marilyn said slowly, her gaze lingering on the fully stocked, organized kitchen visible through the doorway. You told me the infant was being neglected and the home environment was unsafe and filthy. Rachel's performance faltered for a second. Well, Adeline cleaned it up, of course. But you have to understand the mental state she's in. I seized the opening. I let genuine tears well up, using the raw fear and rage I felt. Filthy. Rachel, what on earth did you tell people? I turned to Marilyn, letting my voice shake. Please, look at the nursery. Look at Lily. Marilyn, whose name I was already noting down for later, walked into the nursery and looked at the overflowing shelves of clean diapers and the neatly arranged clothes. She spent a good 60 seconds assessing the space, Lily, and my demeanor. When she returned, her posture was different. She was no longer curious, she was annoyed. She turned to Rachel, her voice firm. Rachel, the child is well cared for. The environment is perfectly safe. I'm afraid you need to stop wasting people's time with claims of neglect. If you are truly concerned about your sister-in-law, you should be encouraging her to seek support, not creating false reports. Rachel stammered, trying to justify herself. That's when I pulled out my phone. I didn't play a recording. I scrolled through my texts. The ones where Rachel insisted I was unfit, and then later asked Nate to help her. Take Lily for a few weeks. I thrust the screen toward Marilyn. She doesn't want me to get help, I said, my voice now dropping to a cold, hard level. She wants my baby. She's been telling everyone she's going to adopt soon. Marilyn read the texts. Her face hardened completely. She looked back at Rachel, who was now attempting to explain with frantic, high-pitched excuses. Rachel, Marilyn interrupted. I strongly advise you to seek professional help for yourself immediately. What you are describing, and these texts, demonstrate serious boundary issues and preoccupation. This situation is concluded. Marilyn left quickly, sparing no further words for Rachel. I stood there, feeling the adrenaline drain away, leaving a cold, empowering vacuum. The ultimate anchor of Rachel's narrative, the official third-party diagnosis, had just crumbled and exposed her true motivations. Rachel tried to continue her desperate plea, saying she just wanted what was best. I walked her to the front door, my voice calm and low. Get out, Rachel. You are done here. If you ever contact me, or step within 100 feet of this house again, I will have a restraining order waiting for you. I watched her drive away, her face a mask of shocked defeat. I knew this victory was only half the battle. When Nate came home an hour later, I was waiting for him. He looked up from the couch, where he'd been sitting since Rachel left. His eyes red like he'd been crying. But I didn't care about his tears anymore. I walked over and stood right in front of him, my phone, heavy with the weight of the evidence, still in my hand. I stared down at the man who had passively allowed his sister to try and dismantle our family. I kept my voice steady, even though my hands were shaking slightly. My husband tried to give away our baby to his sister, because I was unfit to be a mother. I gave him two choices. Standing in that doorway, the choice was simple. Nate had to face what he'd enabled, or he'd lose everything. The shock of Rachel's failed social worker intervention and my cold dismissal of her had left him looking utterly defeated. His face pale, and his eyes red from whatever solitary tears he'd shed. But his misery meant nothing to me. The only thing that mattered was protecting Lily. I walked over and stood right in front of him, keeping my voice steady. Even though I could feel the tremor of pure adrenaline still running through my hands, I told him he had exactly two choices, and he needed to pick one right now. He could pack his things and get out of our house tonight, or he could sit there and listen while I explained every single way he had betrayed me and our daughter. He opened his mouth like he was going to argue, maybe suggest I was overreacting again, but I held up one finger, cutting him off completely. Choose, Nate. He sank back into the couch cushions, his face going pale, and said he would listen. But I could already see it in his eyes. That faint flicker of the old conflict. Avoidant Nate, the one who was ready to make excuses and tell me I was being overly dramatic. I knew I had to preempt that defense with an undeniable reality. I pulled out my phone and opened the baby monitor app. Scrolling back through days of recordings, finding the most damning evidence. I hit play on the first one and turned up the volume so he couldn't pretend he didn't hear it clearly. Rachel's voice came through first, tight with false sincerity, talking about how Lily would be better off with someone who really understood what a gift she was. Then Nate's voice, hesitant, but clearly agreeing that I seemed too attached. That maybe some space would be good for everyone. I watched his face while the recording played. How his eyes got wider, and his mouth opened slightly in a silent gasp. He tried to interrupt, reaching for my phone. But I pulled it back and held up my hand, stopping him cold. You are going to sit there and listen to every single second of what you said about me. I told him, my voice flat and devoid of warmth. I played the next recording where Rachel, trying to push her formula agenda, claimed I was too tired to be a good mom, and Nate's weak voice, barely a mumble, said maybe she had a point. Then the one where they discussed me being defensive, claiming that defensiveness proved I wasn't thinking clearly. The worst came when Rachel suggested the idea of postpartum psychosis. I played the recording, where she listed the symptoms she'd printed out. And Nate didn't shut her down, didn't defend me, but instead asked with grave concern, what were the symptoms again? Rachel. He had been passively entertaining the possibility that I was genuinely mentally unwell, that I needed to be separated from my child. I played recording after recording, watching him shrink smaller and smaller on that expensive leather couch. His hands gripped his knees until his knuckles were white, and he kept shaking his head in silent denial. But I didn't stop until he had heard all of it. When the last recording finished, the house was so quiet, I could hear the refrigerator humming in the kitchen, a stark contrast to the ugly sound of his betrayal. Nate put his face in his hands and started sobbing, his shoulders shaking with uncontrolled grief. I never meant it that way. Adeline. He choked out, his voice muffled by his palms. Rachel was just worried about you, and I thought maybe she had some good points. I was just worried. I felt something cold and hard settle in my chest, listening to him still trying to make excuses, still trying to blame his weakness on worry. I asked him straight out, my voice slicing through the air, if he actually believed I was an unfit mother, or if he was just too weak to stand up to his sister. He looked up at me, his face streaked with tears. No, I never thought you were unfit. But Rachel kept saying things that made me worry. Kept pointing out how tired I looked. I just thought, maybe giving you a break for a few weeks would help you rest. I stared at him, feeling the profound chasm opening between us. That is not how being a parent works, Nate. You do not just hand your 3-week-old baby to someone else for weeks because you are tired. Every new mom is tired. And asking to take our daughter away wasn't offering help. It was actively trying to replace me as her mother. I cut him off before he could offer another flimsy excuse. I told him I was done listening to words. Now, here were his actual 2 choices, and they were non-negotiable. He could go to therapy with me, real, intensive therapy specializing in family trauma, and he could cut off all contact with Rachel until she got professional help herself. Or I would call a family law attorney in the morning and file for divorce and sole physical custody of Lily. I watched those words hit him like a physical blow. He said I couldn't be serious, that I was upset and not thinking clearly. I laughed. It sounded harsh, even to my own ears. I am completely serious and completely clear-headed. You have until morning to decide, because I am packing bags for Lily and myself right now. And we are going to my mom's house tonight. You are not coming with us. You can sit in this house alone and think about what you have done. About how you chose your sister over your wife and daughter." He stood up, looking desperate. But I walked past him, toward the nursery. My hands were shaking, but they were steady enough to pull out the diaper bag and start filling it. Diapers, wipes, bottles, formula. Everything Lily would need. Nate stood in the doorway of the nursery, watching me, but he didn't say anything, didn't try to stop me. I picked up Lily from her bassinet. She made a little noise in her sleep, but didn't wake up. I held her against my chest and felt my heart pounding, a mixture of terror and fierce, pure strength. I was doing this. I was walking away from my home, my marriage, and the man I loved, all to protect this tiny life. I carried her out to the living room, where Nate was sitting on the couch again, staring at nothing. I told him I meant every word. He had until tomorrow morning to decide if he wanted to be part of this family or not. Then, standing right there in front of him, I called Natalia Perez. She answered on the second ring, and I told her I needed her to come get me and Lily right now. She didn't ask questions. She just said she would be there in less than an hour, and to have everything ready. I hung up and sat in the armchair, holding Lily close, waiting for my escape. Nate tried to talk to me twice. But I just stared at the wall, and didn't respond. I had no more words left for him, lying in my mother's guest bed. The reality of what I'd done, and what Rachel would do next, hit me like a wave. I was physically safe with Lily in the bassinet beside me. But the threat from Rachel felt closer than ever, and the distance from Nate was a profound, aching emptiness. My mother, who had been there within the hour, didn't ask a single question, simply hugging me tight and taking the diaper bag. She held Lily while I finally let myself fall apart, crying harder than I had since the miscarriages. The next morning, the consequences of my ultimatum began to unfold, not quietly, but with a terrifying bang. It was barely 7 o'clock in the morning when a frantic pounding started on my mother's front door. I grabbed my phone and checked the time. Then I heard Rachel's voice, high and frantic, yelling my name, demanding to know where I was keeping her niece. My mother, already awake and dressed, appeared in the doorway, instantly dialing the police. She told me to stay inside with Lily and to keep recording. I opened the voice recorder on my phone. Rachel was screaming through the door that I had no right to take Lily away from her family, that I was being cruel and selfish, that she loved Lily more than anything. My mother's voice, remarkably calm against the hysteria, came through clearly, telling Rachel to leave the property immediately, or the police would be called. I sat on the bed holding Lily, recording every word Rachel said. The officer, a tall, calm man with graying hair, arrived within 10 minutes. Rachel was still yelling when he pulled up. But the screaming stopped instantly as he stepped in front of the door. My mother opened the door, and the officer asked Rachel to step back and explain the situation. Rachel tried to push past my mother, claiming I had stolen her niece. When the officer asked if Lily was her child, Rachel had to hesitate, then say no. He asked if she had any legal custody. Again, no. My mother showed the officer the recording of Rachel's violent outburst through the door, and the officer's expression changed. He listened for a moment, then turned to Rachel and told her she needed to leave immediately or she would be arrested for trespassing and harassment. Rachel looked desperate, begging to see Lily for just 1 minute. The officer was firm. She finally retreated to her car. Sitting there for a full minute, staring at the house before she drove away. The officer came inside and suggested we file a report and strongly consider a restraining order. Reviewing all the documentation I had collected, the texts, the previous social worker incident, and now the audio of the harassment. Around noon, Nate arrived. My stomach dropped until I saw his face. He looked terrible, exhausted, and completely alone. My mother let him in. But her expression was cold, a clear message of protection and judgment. Nate stood in the entryway and looked at me, holding Lily. He didn't make excuses. He said he had chosen us. He said he would do whatever it took, that he would cut off Rachel, go to therapy, and anything else I demanded. Words are easy, Nate. I told him, my voice flat. I need to see action. He nodded, looking exactly as defeated as I expected. I told him his first action was to call his parents right now, with me listening, and tell them the absolute truth about what Rachel did and what he had allowed to happen. He pulled out his phone, his hands shaking, and dialed his father, Hugo, putting the call on speaker. Nate started explaining the morning's events. Rachel's screaming, the police. Hugo interrupted immediately, defensive. He said Rachel was just going through a hard time with her infertility, and that we needed to be more understanding. He said Rachel was family, and we couldn't just cut her off. Nate's voice got louder, a strained, new sound of confrontation. He said Rachel had tried to take Lily, that she had manipulated everyone into thinking I was unfit. Hugo scoffed, calling it a strong word, and saying, maybe Rachel was just trying to help in her own way. I took the phone from Nate. My voice was steadier than I felt, infused with the cold resolve of a woman who had been betrayed too many times. I understand infertility pain better than anyone, Hugo, after 2 miscarriages, I said. But that does not give Rachel the right to try to steal my baby. Elodie, Nate's mother, got on the line then, already crying. She said this was tearing the family apart. I kept talking, detailing the recordings, Rachel saying she'd be a better mother, and Nate agreeing I seemed too attached to my own daughter. I told them about the social worker incident, about Rachel lying about neglect. Hugo tried to interrupt, claiming I was taking things out of context. I talked over him, telling them I had recordings of everything, and I would play them in court if necessary. Rachel tore this family apart when she decided she deserved my baby more than I did. I finished, my voice shaking with conviction. I am done being understanding while everyone enables her behavior. You can either accept that Rachel needs serious, professional help, or you can join her on the list of people who are not allowed around my daughter. Elodie asked if I was really going to keep them from their granddaughter. I told her that depended entirely on whether they could accept reality and stop making excuses for their daughter's dangerous behavior. I handed the phone back to Nate and walked away, my entire body shaking, but feeling victorious in the setting of that clear, non-negotiable boundary. For weeks, the small, consistent actions were rebuilding something, but I knew the truce with Rachel wouldn't last. My confrontation with Nate, and the painful call with his parents, had forced the first major boundary. but the real work of redemption belonged to Nate, and he was finally showing up for it. 2 days after I left, Natalia's husband, Gregory, a family therapist, insisted we meet. The session was in his quiet office, a room designed for vulnerability. When Gregory asked Nate why he thought his wife needed to be separated from her 3-week-old baby to rest, Nate struggled to answer. Gregory helped Nate see how deeply he had betrayed me and how his lifelong pattern of protecting Rachel from consequences had taught her that manipulation works. Nate looked deeply uncomfortable, but he didn't deny it. He realized he was more afraid of his family being upset with him than he was of losing his wife and daughter. That realization was the bitter medicine he needed. I followed Natalia's advice and met with a sharp family law attorney, Christina Watkins. Her office was downtown, all dark wood and leather. She reviewed my texts and recordings, telling me I had a strong case for a restraining order and for limiting Nate's family's access if they continued to pose a risk. Christina suggested sending Rachel a formal cease and desist letter immediately to establish clear legal boundaries. I agreed. The letter went out that afternoon via certified mail, spelling out that Rachel was to have absolutely no contact with me, Lily, or our home. 2 days later, Nate's mother, Adeline, called me directly. Her voice cracked with genuine grief. She admitted she had known for years that Rachel's obsession was unhealthy, but had always let it drop because confronting Rachel about her pain was too hard. She said she was seeing how their enabling had damaged Rachel. Adeline asked if there was any hope in the distant future. After Rachel got proper treatment for supervised visits, I told her honestly that I didn't know, but that my priority was Lily's safety, and their feelings came second. Elodie thanked me for even considering it. Nate also started individual therapy with a man named Dr. Miller. He came home from one of his sessions looking profoundly shaken. He told me Dr. Miller helped him understand how his family's dysfunction had taught him to normalize Rachel's boundary violations. He realized he had internalized the need to always prioritize keeping peace over addressing dangerous problems. This wasn't just Nate being sorry. This was Nate doing the grueling, necessary work to change. 3 weeks after the ultimatum, I started noticing real changes. Nate didn't wait for me to manage his family. When Hugo called about Thanksgiving plans, Nate immediately shut it down, saying we weren't ready. When Rachel tried to send a gift through their other sister, Nate intercepted it and sent it back with a firm note that all contact must cease. Then Christina called with an unexpected message. Rachel's therapist wanted to request a mediated conversation. Rachel had been working hard, her therapist claimed, and wanted to apologize and take accountability for the harm she had caused. I felt physically sick at the thought of seeing her, but Gregory, the family therapist, thought it might offer crucial closure if done in a controlled, legal setting. I reluctantly agreed, mostly because I needed to look her in the face and tell her exactly what she had done. The mediated session happened on a cold Tuesday morning at Christina's office. Rachel walked in looking utterly terrible, thin and pale, her eyes perpetually red. She sat across the table from me, with Nate by my side, and both our lawyers flanking us. Rachel cried through most of her apology. She admitted she had convinced herself that I didn't deserve Lily, because of her own profound grief over her miscarriages. She said watching me have a healthy baby had broken something in her mind, convincing her that the universe had made a mistake, and Lily should have been hers. She acknowledged she had deliberately lied about me being unfit and tried to manipulate the family. When she finished, I told her I was sorry for her pain. But I followed that empathy with the hard truth. You tried to steal my baby. That is not something I can just forgive. Because you are hurting. I agreed to consider supervised contact in the distant future, only if she remained in treatment and respected boundaries. I told her Lily was my daughter, not hers, and that would never change. Rachel nodded, defeated, and signed the legal agreement. No contact for at least 6 months, continued therapy, and all future contact, only through supervised channels with my explicit permission. She whispered a final apology, and I didn't respond. I watched her leave with her therapist, feeling exhausted and relieved all at once. Nate wrapped his arms around me outside the office building, and the long-held tears finally came. The truce with Rachel was signed on paper, but I instinctively knew it wouldn't last. And I was right. 4 months after the mediation, I was at a busy park with Lily and Natalia. We were sitting on a bench when my friend Maria walked over. Her face tight with worry. She leaned down and quietly told me she had just seen Rachel sitting in a gray sedan across the street, watching us. My stomach dropped. I looked where Maria pointed and saw Rachel clearly visible in the driver's seat. She wasn't approaching, she was stalking. She had somehow known we would be at this specific park at this specific time. She had completely violated the agreement. The apology, the signed document, the promise of self-improvement. It was all meaningless. Rachel still thought she had some right to be near Lily. I grabbed Lily from her stroller, my hands shaking so badly I could barely buckle her into the car seat. I drove straight home and called Christina from the parking lot. My voice was high and panicked. Christina answered immediately. "This is exactly what we prepared for, Adeline." She tested the boundary. "Now we file the restraining order." The documented pattern of behavior, plus this stalking incident, will make it easy to approve. When Nate came home, I was still shaky. He called Rachel immediately, his voice cold and furious, in a way I had never heard before, the new resolve finally overcoming the old weakness. He told her she had destroyed every possibility of a future relationship with Lily. He hung up on her while she was still trying to justify herself. Christina filed the paperwork the next morning. A week later, we were in court. The judge reviewed the recordings, the texts, the social worker incident, and now the documented park stalking. Rachel's lawyer tried to paint her as a grieving woman who made a mistake, but the pattern was too clear. The restraining order was granted that same day. Rachel had to stay at least 500 feet away from me, from Lily, and from our home. The legal victory was complete, final, and sadly necessary. The restraining order meant safety. But the real work, the quiet, difficult work of healing, was only just beginning. Nate's parents, Hugo and Elodie, came over that evening, looking destroyed. Elodie's eyes were red from crying, and Hugo looked like he had aged 10 years. They sat on our couch. And Hugo said they couldn't believe it had come to this, that their daughter now had a restraining order against her. Nate didn't soften. He told them Rachel did this to herself by stalking us at the park after we had given her a chance. He said they had been making excuses for Rachel his whole life, protecting her from consequences, because they felt guilty about her infertility, and that was exactly why she thought she could try to take our baby. Elodie cried harder, but Hugo went quiet. After a long moment, he admitted Nate was right. They should have insisted Rachel get therapy years ago, instead of enabling her obsession. They had failed Rachel by protecting her from reality, and now everyone was paying the price. I told Nate's parents I appreciated that they were finally acknowledging the truth. Elodie wiped her eyes and said they would see a therapist themselves to work through their guilt. Hugo asked if we could all move forward now that Rachel had legal consequences. I told him maybe, but it would take time, and they needed to respect that I would never fully trust them after they believed Rachel's lies so easily. 5 months had passed since that day I gave Nate his 2 choices. We were functioning like a real team again. But something fundamental had shifted. I trusted him more than I had during the worst of it, but the memory was a scar we both felt. Some nights I would wake up and watch him sleeping, remembering the sight of him nodding along while Rachel listed my supposed symptoms of depression. The memory would hit me like ice water, and I would have to consciously remind myself that he had chosen us, that he was different now. Nate knew about these moments. He acknowledged in therapy that sometimes I would still see him, sitting on that couch with Rachel's printed articles spread between them. Gregory, our couples therapist, helped us define our new normal. Nate had broken something precious, and rebuilding would take years, not months. Nate had to accept that I needed ongoing reassurance, that he couldn't just apologize and expect everything to go back to normal. He agreed, saying he would rather spend his life earning back my trust than lose me and Lily by being defensive. That session helped more than all the others combined, because Nate finally got it. My mother packed up to go home, but promised to visit every few weeks. She hugged me at the door and said she was proud of how I had protected Lily, that I had shown real strength by doing the hard thing, even when I was terrified. Before she left, she pulled Nate aside and told him he had better never give her reason to come back and take me and Lily away for good. He promised her he wouldn't. I started taking Lily to baby classes at the community center. There was a music class on Tuesdays and a movement class on Thursdays. I met other moms who just wanted to talk about sleep schedules and teething. Nobody knew about Rachel or the restraining order or any of the drama. It felt good to have these normal conversations, to be around people who saw me as just another new mom instead of someone who had been through trauma. Nate came home one evening and told me he had gotten a promotion at work. He immediately said he wanted to take the paternity leave he had skipped when Lily was born. He wanted 2 weeks now, just to be with Lily, to reclaim the experience that had been stolen from us by the crisis. This was the new Nate. He understood what he had missed. I told him yes, that it would be good for both of them. Rachel's therapist called Nate's phone and asked to speak to both of us. She said Rachel was moving to another state for intensive treatment at a facility specializing in infertility trauma and obsessive disorders. Rachel wanted us to know she was leaving, that we wouldn't have to worry about running into her. She had accepted she would never have a relationship with Lily. Part of me felt relief wash over me, knowing she would be hundreds of miles away. Nate's parents called a few days later asking if they could have regular grandparent time, now that Rachel was moving away. I thought about it for a long minute. They had apologized, admitted they were wrong, and started therapy. I told them they could visit every Sunday afternoon at our house. They had to respect our rules, leave when we asked, and never bring up Rachel or make excuses for her behavior. Hugo and Elodie agreed immediately. Their first visit was awkward. They were too careful, asking permission before holding Lily, and leaving after exactly an hour. But by the third visit, they relaxed and just enjoyed their granddaughter. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. I bought a journal and started writing down everything that had happened. I wrote about Nate's betrayal, the recordings, the restraining order, and the slow process of rebuilding trust. Paloma, my therapist, said processing the trauma by writing would help prevent the feelings from turning into long-term anger. 6 months after everything started, Lily was thriving, sitting up on her own, hitting all her milestones right on schedule. The constant fear that had lived in my chest for months was finally easing. I wasn't jumping at every sound anymore. I could take Lily to the park without scanning for Rachel's car. The hypervigilance was fading into normal parental caution. Nate suggested a date night, our first since Lily was born. We went to a quiet restaurant. He reached across the table and took my hand. He said he wanted to talk about the future, about maybe trying for another baby eventually, about building the family we had always wanted. I was honest with him, in a way I couldn't have been a year ago. I told him I wasn't ready yet, that I needed more time to feel secure in our marriage and trust that he would protect our family no matter what. He said he understood and would wait as long as I needed. He promised me again that he would never let anyone, family or not, threaten our little family again. I believed him, not because of the words, but because he had spent 6 months showing me through consistent actions. I looked at myself in the bathroom mirror one morning while Lily napped. I barely recognized the person staring back. I had become someone who could record conversations with family members, who could threaten divorce, and who could get a restraining order against her husband's sister without flinching. I had learned to trust my instincts, even when everyone around me said I was wrong. That strength didn't come naturally. It came from pure fear, mixed with love so fierce it surprised me. Every time I wanted to give in or make peace, I remembered Rachel saying she would be a better mother, and Nate nodding along like an idiot. That memory kept my spine straight. Nate's relationship with his parents slowly improved. Hugo and Elodie started individual therapy and came to our house to discuss how they had enabled Rachel and damaged Nate by expecting him to go along with it. I respected that they were finally doing the work, even though the damage was already done. Our relationship would never be what it could have been, but their effort to change and their genuine love for Lily was enough for now. I started planning Lily's first birthday party, keeping it small, just 20 people. Nate's parents were invited because they had proven themselves. My mom, Natalia and her family, and a few friends from my mom group. This time, I was in control of who came into our space. Paloma helped me process the grief for the family experience I had wanted. The big gatherings, the close relationships with in-laws. That vision died when Rachel tried to take my baby. Paloma said I needed to accept the small, safe circle we had created instead of mourning what we didn't. A year after Lily's birth, I found photos from those first weeks home, including the one from the welcome home party, where Rachel held Lily with that strange intensity. The memory of the manipulation and betrayal still hurt, knowing those first weeks were tainted by fear. But then Lily crawled over to me and pulled herself up using my leg, laughing at her own accomplishment. I picked her up instead of dwelling on the past. This was what I protected, this happy, healthy, safe baby. I had made hard choices that hurt people and damaged relationships. But I would do it all again to keep her safe. Nate and I discussed having another baby. I was honest. I needed more time to feel secure in our marriage. He understood. He had broken something precious, and rebuilding took time. But we had Lily, and that was enough for now. Life settled into a new normal. Lily was safe and loved and thriving. She didn't know her Aunt Rachel, and probably never would. I learned that being a good mother sometimes means making hard choices that hurt, trusting your instincts even when everyone says you are wrong, and protecting your child even when it costs you the family you imagined. I had become someone fiercer and stronger through this experience. That person looked back at me from the mirror now, and I was proud of her, even though the journey to become her hurt like hell.